Well, why don't we get started? So this is the Claiming Our Faith session. So faith crisis was a huge thing in the past year. Trauma within the LGBT Mormon community, within the Affirmation community, was something we were dealing with last year. And yet, in spite of it all, I still find myself attending church. So that's why we're doing this session, is to just kind of talk about those different journeys. So each of us, Jenn Lee and I, will each take about 5 minutes apiece to sort of share a piece about our story. And then after that, the idea was that we'd have a fairly open discussion. And each of you would have a chance to sort of maybe share something about your own journey of faith, how you're claiming your faith as a Latter-day Saint, and maybe kind of talk about some of the challenges and the joys as well. And I'm also hoping that there can be some discussion too about what can straight people do to help. So anyway, that's I don't know if you wanted to. So do you want to start, or would you rather I start?
I can start.
Okay.
I can start. Yes. So I grew up in the church. My parents were converts in their teenage years in Taiwan, and I was pretty sheltered. I grew up in a bubble, in a church bubble. I had some questions in high school, but they weren't important enough, I suppose, to keep me from going to BYU, where I thought I would find a sense of community. And I did, to an extent. But I think there were a couple of things that were always nagging. One was racial identity. I'd grown up many, many years in Utah. And there were some pretty blatant experiences where I felt less than, right? Marginalized for just the color of my skin. So I dealt with that a little bit at BYU, and so the racial identity stuff, and then also that kept me busy. And also just kind of this hierarchy of genders that I'd noticed, from as a child, right? Your boy cousins can do things that you can't do. So fast forward to grad school, where I had one question. It was my professor, Valerie Hudson at BYU, who wrote the book Bare Branches about the sex-ratio imbalance in China. I wanted to follow up on that question and look at, spatialize that question. Like, does that, is it higher, is sex-ratio imbalance, which is like more boys than girls in China? Does that happen, across the board, or at what level? So I got down to the county level, was asking that question. My advisor said that, I think you should take a women's studies course. That would help. That would help with your question. So I did. And that's where my faith crisis began. Faith crisis, or maybe faith enlightenment. Yeah. So when you start to deconstruct, that's where the journey began. Jenn, feminist theories were perfect and empowering, but at the same time disempowering, because I had the rug pulled out from under me with this new language of relativism, of socially constructed organization, socially constructed religion, the death of absolutism. And my tower of faith crumbled. I had to kind of figure out how to build it up again. I abandoned everything that had to do with Mormonism, and I started to build up my sense of identity, my authenticity with vibration. So I would say that started in '08, and the last 8 years, I've accumulated some experience. So here are my 7 kind of major factors that helped in getting me out of a place of crisis. And Eric, he talked about this last night. It very much resonated with me. I also have major depression. It's all interrelated, I think, our spiritual health and mental health and physical health. So today I'm still on this journey of navigating, my own faith. And I kind of don't want this journey to end. I want it to always be going, because once I'm settled on something, I feel like that doesn't feel authentic to me, to have arrived anywhere. I personally enjoy the journey. But at least I'm not in the crisis. So here are the 7 easy do-it-yourself tricks to navigate your own personal faith crises. Okay. 8 years ago, at the pinnacle of my existential angst, my path crossed with a fellow Mormon PhD student mom. She had gone through her own faith crisis and was settling into a renewed faith built on compassion, non-judgment, seeing the marginalized, and Christ's greatest commandment. She was critical in helping me to rebuild my tower. So, number 1, a friend and a guide. What is that greatest commandment? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first great commandment. The second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these 2, technically 3 commandments, because you gotta love God, you gotta love your neighbor, and you gotta love yourself. So it's really 3 commandments, right? So practicing true authenticity with yourself, and also with a connection with some sort of deity. I mean, if you're atheist, a connection with whatever life force that you find the most helpful. So for me, that tall, white, Scandinavian-looking guy with the beard, it wasn't doing it for me.
What you got against Scandinavians?
Incidentally, I married a tall, white, Scandinavian man. That's what my husband looks like. So actually, creating my own personal God, not in that likeness, is actually quite healthy, right?
Yeah.
So personal God, number 2. Having your own personal God, personal energy, life-giving force. What else is healthy? What else is healthy? Like Eric said last night, we need our good sleep, a good diet, and exercise. In addition to that, therapy and coaching and practicing what I had control over, and being present in the moment. Practicing meditation, those sorts of things. I think it's just it needs to be daily. These things need to be daily. Very basic. So I would say number 3, mental and physical health. At some point, I had to let go of the feeling of being duped by the church. I had to let go of the bitterness. I had to let go of being duped by the leaders, by selected history, a lot of selected history. At some point, I had to let that out. And that's practicing forgiveness, number 4.
What was 4?
Forgiveness. Practicing forgiveness.
Yeah. You can't, I think our leaders, they don't do things intentionally. They're very much a product of their own life experiences. And allowing them that consideration gives us peace. Okay, so this is a tough one. Recognizing the difference between culture doctrine. The structural organization versus the Christ-like core, Christ-like compassion. That's always an ongoing. That takes a lot of stepping out of your box and saying, I don't know if the Relief Society was doing that in the spirit of love. Maybe she was doing it for cultural reasons, stemming from her life experiences. So we need to have patience with organizational structures in general, because the church is both. The church is so successful, right? It's in what it does, because our leaders are experts at organizational behavior. We've expanded our tent all around the world. We're one of the most successful organizations to be able to do that successfully. And that's because we're hyper organized and industrious. But there's a downside to that. There's a downside to being so strategic. So it needs to survive. I mean, I wrote a paper about this a while ago, like the two pillars, right? The need to expand and the need to retain. So a lot of the leaders' policies are based around these two kind of crucial pillars. So having that, considering that, a lot of the policies kind of make sense. What number are we on? 5, right? So patience with the organizational structures of their need to survive would be number 5. Okay. So 6, recognizing that I had all the tools that I needed to climb out of my furnace of despair, pity, and bitterness. I have the tools. I don't know if you all read East of Eden, but my favorite line from Steinbeck's book is, "The free and thinking human mind is the most powerful thing in the world." We are all capable. We are the only ones that can restrict our ability to think outside of the box to what I call a poverty of creativity. You could be the richest man in the world, but if you can't step out of your own privileges, if you can't fully recognize your place, your context, then you're actually quite poor of mind. So number 6, I actually call channel your inner strong Black independent woman.
Okay.
Like
Or
Destiny's
Asian
Child.
woman.
Well, actually, no. I drew a lot of power from Destiny's Child growing up. Beyonce, right? Like I'm a survivor, independent woman. Yeah, you have the power. You have the power to climb out of these situations. And then last, appreciating the gift of agency. So I have the power of choice, knowing that man's choice is his ladder to the stars. That's what separates man from animal, is that we have this gift of agency. This was the biggest one for me. That also kind of comes from having read East of Eden. If you ever get a chance to do so, there's a character in there named Lee, and he's one of the few Asian characters, I think, in American literature, who actually takes a very prominent role in the story arc. And he basically was friends with Adam, the protagonist in the book, and said, "Hey, can I read this Bible of yours?" And he's reading, he's like, "I've been studying your Bible, and I don't really think that your commandments says thou shalt. I really do think, I think it's actually thou mayest." Because I looked it up, and in Hebrew, Tim Shel is thou mayest. It's not thou shalt. God's not telling us that you gotta do this. He's saying you could do this. That's the difference. This book of yours is actually amazing when interpreted in its original form, original language. It's thou mayest. So that's what did it for me.
Wow. Wow. I would like to publish those on the Affirmation website. I think those 7 points are deeply wise. And in terms of my own story and my own experience, I think at some point or another, I've had to find ways to do each of those things. And certainly for me, there's a power, for example, in claiming my agency. The things that I do, the aspects of my faith that I live by my choice. Because it's things that bring me a sense of closeness to God, that help me solve very real problems in my life. I was born and raised in the LDS Church. My mom was a convert. My dad was a fifth-generation Mormon. I have ancestors who crossed the plains from Nauvoo. And I was a very faithful, devout little gay Mormon and served a mission for the church. Went to BYU. Had been sort of struggling with the whole issue of same-sex attraction since I was about 10 years old. 14 was the age that I knew I was homosexual. That was the word I looked up in the dictionary. And read Spencer W. Kimball's Miracle of Forgiveness when I was 16 years old as part of my search to try to figure out what to do about this. President Kimball had convinced me that I was going to be straight by the end of my mission, at the time when I needed to marry and start a family. When that didn't happen, I tailspun into a deep depression, left BYU, almost committed suicide. Resigned from the church, had an experience with the Lord, in which the Lord told me that he knew who I was because he knew me from my inmost being, and he fully accepted me. And it was, for me, coming out was a spiritual process. It was something that came about as a result of prayer and fasting and seeking God's guidance. And every step of that way, God was with me in that process, and was with me in the process of discerning what should I do with my life. And ultimately, when I decided to marry a man, I knew that that was the right thing for me. That was part of the path that God had for me. And my husband and I had been together for about 13 years when I had a profound spiritual experience in which I felt the Lord saying, okay, it's time for you to come back. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. I was like, Lord, you were the one who guided me into this relationship with my husband. What are you telling me now? Am I supposed to leave him? So this was kind of a traumatic experience for me initially, but as I continued on the journey, I got very clear messages from the Lord. The first message was, I'm not asking you to do anything drastic, I'm just asking you to come back to church. Just start attending church. You can do that right. You can just attend. And I started living the word of wisdom and started studying the scriptures daily and praying and incorporating those things into my life. And it was a powerful, powerful thing. And I would go to church on Sunday and I would sit on the back seat and I wouldn't talk to a soul and I would just cry. Tears would come down my face because I felt the Spirit and I knew it was here. And I knew I needed to be there. And that has been my journey ever since. And whenever anybody in the church has come to me and said, well, you need to do this or you need to do this. And I'm kind of like, well, I'm following the Spirit. I I have a kind of liahona. And if the wheel stops moving, if the arrow stops pointing, I know I'm doing something wrong. So I need to figure out what that is, and I need to get back on the path so that that compass will start working again, so that I can have the Holy Spirit in my life. But as long as that compass is working, I'm fine. Right? And so if I stop having the Spirit in my life, I know there's some change I need to make. And what I found is the Spirit has guided me in this relationship with my husband. And continues to guide me. And I am the most imperfect person in this room when it comes to anything. We don't have to be perfect in order for the Spirit to be with us, but we can have that guidance. And so for me, the number one piece has been that relationship with God has been the foundation, its core, it's everything in my life. And so before I just want to share one thing, and then we'd like to sort of open it up to some discussion, and maybe you can share some of your stories. Affirmation did a survey to gauge the impact of the policy of November 2015. And what we found is that prior to the policy, so we had over 900 people who responded to this survey, and we distributed it in Spanish, Portuguese, English, so we had significant participation from Affirmation members in Latin America. And we had about 50% men, 50% women who responded to the survey. So it was a really good survey in terms of gauging, in terms of race, gender. It was very inclusive. And so it gave us a really good sense of where folks in the Affirmation community, how the survey impacted them. And one of the things that we found was a little over half of our members prior to the policy were active in the church, moderately or extremely active in the church. And after the policy, that number dropped by about 50%. About half of our members just found church so painful they couldn't go anymore. And so we had about 1 in 4, after the policy, about 1 in 4 members of the Affirmation community were still active in the church in some way. And we asked a whole bunch of questions, and when we dug into that data, I asked, for me, the question was, okay, for those who stayed, why did they stay? Why did they stay? Why didn't they leave like all of the other people? And one of the things I looked at was, what was your relationship with God? And we asked people on the survey to tell us about their relationship with God. And if we filtered out the people who said they had a strong relationship with God, that prayer was an important part of their life, that they went to God for guidance and help. If people said that their relationship with God was strong, those individuals were 10 times as likely to stay active in the church as people who had a kind of so-so relationship with God. We found that even though a majority of those people who were still active in the church had experienced a major loss of trust in the leaders of the church, that they all still had a very strong faith and a very strong belief in God. And we found that in terms of a lot of the other things that we were looking at in terms of the emotional impact, the policy for many, many in our community caused a dramatic increase in depression, caused a dramatic decrease in hopefulness and optimism about the future. But what we found is that those people who had that strong relationship with God were half as likely to have experienced serious depression after the policy. That they were 2 to 3 times more likely to still have a sense of hope and optimism about the future. And they were 3 times more likely to have strong, positive relationships with other members of the church, right? And we found that they were able to, some of the things that you talked about, right? Forgiveness is such a huge thing, right? Forgiveness creates a sense of freedom for us, and it's kind of this, miracle healing potion in community, right? Broken relationships in community are healed. So, so that's, what we found in that survey, I think, to me, was a very powerful validation of this idea. And so the board met in January of 2016, and we sort of posed the question, what do we do? How do we strengthen and minister to the Affirmation community? We said 2 messages are crucial. Message number 1, trust yourself. Believe in yourself. Believe that you have the power to discern what is right and what is wrong, and make decisions for your life that are right. That you have the power. Never make anyone believe. Never let anyone make you believe that anything can come between you and God. Never let anybody say to you, you can't have God in your life because you're doing X, Y, or Z. You can't have the Spirit in life because you are a sinner, right? Never let anybody give you that message. So believe in yourself. So that's message number 1. And believe in God. Trust that God can guide you. And we felt that if people had those 2 messages, and they understood them, and they believed them, and they internalized them, that we would have health, we would have wholeness, we would have spirituality within our community. People would have the resources and the strength that they need to make their own decisions, right? And so if you need to leave the church, if you have those 2 things, if you have a trust and a belief in yourself, and even if you don't believe in God, as Jenn Lee says, if you have some kind of a spiritual connection to something that centers you, to something that grounds you, no matter where you go, in or out of the church, you're going to be okay. And that's what we want to foster.
I had so many thoughts. I feel like I could be here for like 50 more hours, but I felt the Spirit at the Unitarian Church, at River of Life. I felt the Spirit in hiking in the woods. We could find our personal peace and spirituality anywhere. That's my personal belief. And I think we're all pioneers here. I mean, until I figure out a better word, but this is a very Mormon word. We're all pioneers because it's all brand new territory. And from what I gather, we're all seeking understanding. We're all truth seekers here. And my name in Chinese is Shangzhen. It's actually literally upholding the truth. And that's what I've gravitated to all my life, is upholding the truth. And the truth that I see is that what Eric said last night about being gay not being a choice, that is the truth. Him being Mormon and gay, he said, I'm Mormon and gay, only one of them was a choice. And that's being Mormon. And this is the choice that we get to make. And that's empowering, that we get to choose how we believe and how we practice our belief systems. And for your children, I mean, it's so hard as a mom of 3. I agree, like, yeah, I will. The bear claws will come out, if anyone were to do that. But just know that we have more in common than we have differences. Male, woman, Black, Asian, ally, gay. We are unified in our desire to seek truth and to love.
Thank you.